Hello again, friends. Lovely to have you with me for the second part of the Tour de los Tejas recap. I've really enjoyed telling the story for the first time in 3 years, so thank you for tuning in and humoring me. If you haven't had the opportunity to go listen to Tour de los Tejas Part 1, I suggest maybe consider doing that first for some context. But either way, I hope you'll enjoy this conclusion as a standalone story too. Welcome to the Choose to Endure podcast, the go-to show for back-of-the-pack ultra runners. Join us as we explore uplifting stories, interviews, gear, and training tips, all tailored towards the unsung heroes at the back end of the ultra universe. My name's Richard Gleave. I've been ultra running since 2017. I've finished numerous ultra distances from 50K all the way up through 200 miles. I'm a qualified UASCA ultra running coach, and I'm unashamedly a member of the back of the pack, just like you. Right then, if you're ready and willing, let's pick up the story at the start of day 3. As a reminder, day 2 was wet, it was cold, and it was getting colder, and I'd called my buddy Chuck to come meet me at the hotel I'd stopped at just on the northern outskirts of LaGrange. My progress in the race was now wholly tied to whether or not he would show up and at what time. So I went to sleep on the second night, warm at last, but very apprehensive.
Discover raw, inspiring stories from runners who've been right where you are. This is the Choose to Endure Ultra Running Podcast with your host.
He's English, not Australian.
Richard Gleave.
The next day, day 3, I was up at 5 a.m. and I immediately checked my phone to see where Chuck was. I was delighted to find that he'd set off from Houston at 4 a.m. and his ETA was approximately 6:50. So with that, I did a bit more faffing around, I packed up my gear, got dressed, and went downstairs. Now, the hotel I was staying at put on an unexpected hot breakfast buffet, something of a rarity in those COVID times. So I was actually able to get my fill of coffee, orange juice, or water, and feast on some scrambled eggs, sausage, and potatoes. Just the thing after last night's eating fiasco. So feeling full and somewhat revived, Chuck duly arrived, and I gratefully changed into my warmer gear. I believe I set off that morning right around 7:10 a.m. I checked my watch. But the mileage for the day was shorter than the previous 2 at 42 total. So I had high hopes of getting through the day with more hours to recover in the evening. Now, the route had us continuing north from where I stopped. In fact, I had a straight 5-mile section until the FM 153 left turn further up ahead. Immediately I turned onto 77 north again, however, things went south. I tried to run, but my legs were having absolutely none of it. They would not move. And B, I had turned into a 15-mile-per-hour freezing headwind, and it was cold, and I mean very cold. Thankfully, it wouldn't have been wise to run into that anyway, even if I could. So head down, buff up around my face, beanie down, and hands in pockets to protect from the cold, I set off for the day. And 5 miles later, I met Chuck again at the turn up ahead, and I had to jump in his car to warm up. My face was absolutely battered from the constant freezing wind, and I needed more layers. I think I spent 15 minutes in the car warming up and putting more clothes on before I took off west, down 153. Now, 153 itself was a nice rural run, lots of cows, lots of fields. Unfortunately, the fields were exposed, so anytime I ran by one, the wind whipped right through me again. Additionally, this was the worst road surface of the entire race for me, very bumpy, very uneven, to such a degree that it really hurt my feet to walk on it. And then it started to rain, hard. Another jump in the crew car to get out of the wind, and driving rain was necessary. Everything was cold, and I couldn't get warm, so all I could do was try to keep moving. Today was already not a great day. I think, anecdotally, these kinds of days inevitably happen, and when they do, I think it's important to find a positive to hang on to. Even with painful feet, I could still walk okay, so that's what I determined to do, as fast as I could. 9 miles along 153 and 14 miles for my daily total was the town of Winchester. Now, I really wanted to hit Murphy's Steakhouse and Shorty's Bar here for a beer, since I had scouted them early on, but sadly both were closed at the time I arrived. I believe other runners did, and have excellent photos to prove it too, if you can go out there and find them on Facebook. There's literally nothing else in Winchester store-wise, so I trudged on through the freezing rain, wanting to get to the state parks about 23 miles into the day, before dark. Once again, Chuck provided some excellent support. He went and grabbed hot drinks and hot food as needed, and we ate lunch around 2 p.m. in the support car. Shortly thereafter, I had my one and only on-course bathroom emergency. One of the interesting unknowns about ultras, any item you eat might set you off with GI troubles, and there's not always a bathroom around. In this case, I wasn't even out on a trail in the woods. What to do? Ultimately, I decided I had to jump down into a culvert by the side of the road as an emergency number 2 bio break 2 miles away from the state park. FYI, dropping pants in that kind of weather is no bueno. Everything got wet again as I derobed, and despite my best efforts, I'm pretty sure my squatting white ass could be seen from the road. Sorry, drivers, but needs must. Right after this, in that 2-mile stretch before the state park turn, a total of 3 more cars stopped and asked if I needed a lift somewhere, presumably because of the atrocious weather. The last car couple were annoyed that I turned them down, and at this point I had stopped explaining to people what we were doing. It just took too long. But they had sheets of ice all over their car, and they had come from Austin, so that definitely worried me a little since that's where I was headed. Anyhow, I met Chuck again at the entrance to Busha State Park around 3 p.m., and he drove with me the entire 15-mile route to the other side. We chatted and took photos. It was certainly good to have someone to talk to. The park was beautiful, especially since the rain had turned to ice, and these little icicles on all the trees and plants looked like mini chandeliers. The hills were brutal on the legs, though, particularly feet and shins. We went up, we went down, and around for what seemed like an eternity. A lot of the fauna in Bastrop Park in particular is still recovering from a wildfire not too long ago, so burnt-out trees were all over, and these totally added to the spook factor when the sun started to go down, along with the coyote howls in the distance. I would definitely not have liked to have gone through that park totally alone at night. I later learned that's exactly what Lisa Carter, 4 miles behind me, did. More power to her. Fantastic effort. Had we known, we certainly would have gone back to check on her, but we both thought that she'd had a crew with her since I had been checked on by her crew coming into LaGrange very briefly the night before. 5.5 hours after entering the park and a lot of steep climbs and steeper descents, elevation, wind, rain, and sleet, I eventually exited into the eastern outskirts of Bastrop. It was now dark again and very, very cold, made worse by the constant wet clothes and the driving wind. My hotel for the night was on the west side of town, approximately 3 miles away, but the course took us through Bastrop Buc-ee's, so I was looking forward to a quick warm-up there. Chuck drove ahead to the hotel, and I was getting to the day's finish just by myself. As I was approaching Buc-ee's, I got a group messenger notification that Tom and Pam were actually in the Buc-ee's after finishing their days in LaGrange earlier on. They were there getting supplies and could see me coming on the tracker. So I hung around in there a few minutes longer, and eventually I heard Pam shouting at me across the store. And I have to tell you, it was so good to see friendly faces and share stories from the previous couple of days. It was very timely, since I hadn't had a great day at all. Not being able to run, being hellishly cold, trudging along through wind and rain, it reminded me that I wasn't out there racing alone. In fact, none of us were. Much like the day before, I was shivering badly once the sun went down. It was all I could do to get myself out of the warmth of Buc-ee's, where friends were, and start the trek across town. I was pleasantly surprised again by Bastrop. It's another lovely place. I've only ever driven through on the main road there, but a few streets back from the main road is the town itself. Much like LaGrange, it had lots going on, lots of unique shops and boutique places. I definitely want to go back and check out more one weekend. But one thing they hadn't done in Bastrop, though, was grit the dang sidewalks, or at least they hadn't done it very well. I bit it twice on the 3-mile walk to the hotel, slipping on the ice. I eventually reached there around 9:45 p.m. Chuck had ordered pizza and pasta, so we sat around chomping that down after a long day and began to think about scenarios regarding what to do tomorrow. Lisa Carter was now 5 or 6 miles behind me, according to the tracker. Was she going to run straight through to grab the lead as she did at the end of the first day? Was she going to stop? If so, how long was she going to stop for? When should I plan on getting up to get on the road? I honestly hadn't thought about any kind of racing until this point, but having completed 3 of my 4 days, been at the front of the field for most of those, surprisingly, and only being 31 miles from the finish, suddenly I found some competitive juices from somewhere. They turned on, and I actually wanted to win. We couldn't control what Lisa did, and we knew based on her pace and being a distance behind me, she wouldn't likely be getting in until kind of midnight 1 a.m. time frame. As it was, I was in no position to continue through the night, so I figured I would take a chance that she needed to sleep, rest, and warm up for some time too, and if it was still reasonably close when I got up in the morning, that I would go for it and try to make a race to the finish. We decided that I would leave no later than 6 a.m. the next day and move to the end. Total racing for the day, 42 miles in about 13 hours. Really disappointing, very emotional, not what I was expecting at all, but hills and the weather. And such an emotional event, going into Buc-ee's and talking to Pam and Brett, who is Pam's husband and crew, and Tom. They were really an absolute lifesaver that day. Really dug me out of an emotional hole. Day 4. So the alarm went off at 5 a.m. I jumped out of bed, went to check the tracker to see where Lisa had got to overnight. She was still in Bastrop and did not appear to be moving. Okay, game on. In fact, she had stopped on the east side of Bastrop, which meant that she had at least those 3 miles to cover to even get to where I was. So I took my time getting ready. We exited the hotel right at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was brutally cold again, but the wind had at least died down a little bit and there was no rain or mist about, so that was pleasing. Chuck drove off to find some McDonald's for breakfast and I got back on the course. I had roughly half a mile to complete to get out of the town along 71 West Feeder Road before having to take a right, which is north again, onto FM 969, the road that would take us the majority of the way all the way back into Austin. So I set off walking, thinking about how do I maintain this lead. But I quickly noticed some flashing colored lights almost a full half mile ahead of me. Now, it took me a minute, and in my defense, I hadn't had any coffee yet. But it finally dawned on me that this was a person in a lighted tracer running vest like mine, like the one I had been wearing. Why would they be out here at 6 a.m.? Who was it? Uh-oh. The only person it realistically could be was Lisa, but how? She must have left her hotel right around 5 a.m. when I saw her on the tracker, and she'd been making her way across town while I was faffing about getting ready to run. She got the jump on me again, and by this time was about half a mile ahead. So I was pretty irritated with myself, really, not Lisa. Great move on her part. No way was I coming this far to give up that lead, having worked so hard to be in a position to potentially win a race for the first and only time in my life. Okay, chase on. Now, yesterday, I could hardly run at all for whatever reason, so I had mostly walked. I was therefore quite apprehensive about how attempting to run today and needing to run today would work out. I gave it a shot anyway, and lo and behold, I could indeed run again. Not sure why, but I suspect that having hardly run at all yesterday, maybe my running muscles got a break, and we're now ready to go once more. Regardless, I was happy as I made that right turn onto 969, still a ways behind. Just at this point, Chuck rolled up with breakfast. Now, normally I would have grabbed coffee and a sausage and egg sandwich and enjoyed them. He brought 2 of them while I walked, but I was in no mood to be walking right then. So I gave the coffee back, wolfed down one of the sandwiches, and vowed to eat properly if or once I was able to gain enough of a lead back to be able to do so without looking over my shoulder constantly. It turns out this wouldn't be for another 16 miles. As I set off after Lisa, it had not yet gotten light, and I remembered reading about some elite runners at Western States. Or was it Badwater? Or was it somewhere else? I don't know. But I did recall the text talking about them turning off their lights at night. That way, racers ahead and behind couldn't see where they were so as to gain a competitive advantage and not to give their position away. Now, bear in mind, these guys are doing it on a closed course on trails with no traffic. But I was on the road, feet from cars. Stupidly undeterred, I decided that was the tactic for me. So I relayed to Chuck that I was going dark, hoping Lisa couldn't see me coming. Bear in mind, too, at this point I had black long pants on, a black coat, and a black beanie, so with no lights and dressed full-on Johnny Cash style, off I went in hot pursuit. After a while, on the winding, undulating roads, I lost sight of the colored lights ahead of me. I assumed I'd catch up slowly over the course of the day, like I had on day 2. So I didn't really pay much attention to it, to be honest. Chuck rolled up in the car beside me about an hour later and asked how I was doing in the chase. To my surprise, he told me we were now half a mile ahead. Hang on, ahead? How can that be? I haven't passed Lisa on the road. Chuck proceeds to tell me that he had found Lisa a short ways back, and she said she had stopped in a field for a bathroom break. Apparently, I had ghosted right past her while she had her lights off in the field. I didn't realize I had gone by her. I couldn't see her. And she didn't realize I had gone by either, since she couldn't see me. We were both in stealth mode. Excellent news, for me at least. Buoyed by this, I pushed on, continuing my rhythm from days 1 and 2, where I was running the flat and walking the uphills. 969 was another really nice rural route. Fields, farms, cows, and super smooth road surface, perfect for running on. I did enjoy this road quite a bit as it goes. By mile 16 of the day at Weberville, halfway to the finish, I was 4 miles ahead. This was pretty much the only town of any note on today's 31-mile route. As long as I kept walking or moving forwards, at this point I was confident Lisa wouldn't be able to pass me. I finally stopped to eat a second breakfast sandwich and take the coffee that I wasn't able to have earlier on, and I took a 10-minute break. I was right around mile, let's say 170 at this point, so by comparison, the last 15 or so miles should have seemed like a cakewalk. But it wasn't. The exertions of running hard to regain my lead earlier in the day were now beginning to show, and I slowed down quite a bit. According to Chuck, who was going back and forth to Lisa to make sure she was okay, seeing if she needed anything, she was also walking by this point. And with that news, the run went out of me, and I started to walk more. With 8 miles to go, coming into the outskirts of Austin, my shins gave out completely and rebelled. They'd had enough. It felt like someone had took a baseball bat to both of them, and it became excruciatingly painful to walk or run, even worse on the ups and downs. And this reduced me to something of an uneven hobble-wobble. That's the only way I can describe it. Time seemed to stand still from that point onwards. It probably took me 3 hours to finish from there. It felt longer. And I did not appreciate those hills once I got back into Austin city limits. I just couldn't run or walk properly. I wasn't losing ground to Lisa behind me, I don't think, but I did have to keep moving still. I was a fair bit irritated by the situation and that I couldn't run. I had dreamed of cruising triumphantly into Austin as the winner of the race, coolly jogging up the hill to the finish and touching the wall. I suspected that's what real runners who win races would definitely be doing. And here I was, hobbling and wobbling like an old lady. I think I told Chuck at one point that I didn't feel like much of a race leader, that's for sure. Nonetheless, I did eventually make it back to the capital, and up the final, incredibly steep incline to once again get on the building grounds. I spotted Rob, the race director, standing against the wall right where we had left 4 days earlier, and I summoned up the energy to jog over. If you see the video, that's the most painful jog I've ever done. But touch the wall I did, and just like that, the race was over. I was finished. I could stop. And for the first time in my life, I had won a running race in my late 40s. The daily total was about 31, 32 miles, 8.5 hours-ish. I was elated, but I'm English, so we don't really do outward emotions very well unless a lot of beer is involved first. Congratulatory fist bump it was then. I received a super cool embroidered finisher's jacket with a race logo on it and a wicked handcrafted wooden belt buckle with my name on the back for completing the distance. Those are things I will cherish forever, but all I wanted to do right then was sit down and go get some fast food, such as ultra running life. We duly went off, found some Chick-fil-A, and went back to the Capitol to watch and clap Lisa in roughly an hour and a half later. She did an amazing job of running and showed huge character to keep going, keep chasing the whole way around. I was incredibly impressed. She had a fantastic race, and she should be insanely proud of her efforts as well. I hope she is. I still can't believe she went through the parks by herself at night. Massively great job, Lisa Carter. After finishing, I went back to my hotel, I showered, I waddled over to Chuck's hotel for a celebratory beer or three. I think I had an Austin Beer Works 701 Sun Session IPA. It was really pretty good. And then I went back to my hotel and crashed hard. What a 4 days. Trevor Medding won the 600-kilometer version of this race, twice as long, almost 400 miles, if you can believe that. An unfathomably long way and an incredible effort. I think, too, Trevor is Canadian, right? So nice to see the Commonwealth still out here and showing colonials how it's done then, right? The day after, when I woke up the Saturday morning, I checked the race feed on Facebook and I saw that Luis had run through the night from Bastrop to the finish. He'd come in third at 4 a.m. to the Austin Capitol building. Good grief. Kudos to Luis. That would have been exceptionally dark, windy, and cold. What kind of lunatic would do that? Well, apparently a dad whose child had requested him to be back at a sporting event to watch her later on that Saturday. Luis ran through the night, his only option to be able to finish the race and be back home in time on the Saturday to make that happen. People, that is Parent of the Year award right there. Magnificent effort. The other news, however, was all about the ice storm coming this way. I checked in with home and learned that my son really wanted me to head back to Houston, as did the wife, ahead of the storm hitting and getting stuck in Austin, since overpasses and freeways were threatening to get closed down. Now, I had originally planned to stay through the weekend because I wanted to wait for and cheer on any runners that happened to finish after me at the Capitol building. But this wasn't now going to be possible. But I theorized I could travel back towards Houston the same way I had run in on the course the previous day, since it had no bridges to get closed. Additionally, this would also then take me past racers who were still out on the course, Tommy, Pam, and Kevin at this point. Now, I really wanted to go check on them and see if I could be of any assistance. I know how much of a boost it was to have Chuck checking on me as crew, so I wanted to pay it forward and do what I could do for other folks out there and make sure they were doing okay, especially since I remembered a couple of them had no crew. So I set off. I bumped into Tom first. He seemed like he was doing pretty well. He was running nicely. He was halfway done with the last day by the time I caught up with him at Weberville, approximately 15 miles from the finish. He took a few minutes to warm up in the car since it was very, very cold again, and we chatted about his race and his estimated finish. He was in search of some hot food, but I had neglected to bring any with me, which definitely poor planning on my part. I'm kind of new to the crewing gig. But luckily, there was a store just half a mile up the road, which I thought had hot items for sale and would be open. So I offered to go grab some pizza for him, but he told me don't worry about it, he'd be fine, and to keep going down the road. So I duly obliged. Tom finished a few hours later, having found the hot food at that store, and he continued looking strong. I believe he waited for Pam at the finish too, which I think goes to show, again, just how much we were all here supporting each other to get to the end and making these friendships along the way. Next on my visit list was Pam. She's such an uplifting individual. She can grind out loads of miles, but I really wanted to stop by and give my support to her any way I could, let her know I was genuinely very excited for her to get to the end. She wasn't actually too far behind Tommy, just a few miles down the road, and she was being crewed by her ever-supportive and brilliant husband, Brett. So I figured she wouldn't need a whole lot from me nutrition-wise. It would be more moral support maybe I could offer her. I pulled off the road just ahead of where she was, and I waited. I think she was genuinely surprised to see me standing there waiting for her. Like Tommy, she looked in great shape. She was chugging along really nicely. We hugged. She told me how her day was going, which turns out was pretty well, and I let her know she was doing brilliant and was nearly halfway done with the last day. And I cheered and clapped for her as she carried on along to the next turn up the road. I have so much respect for Pam and how strong mentally she is. I believe both Pam and Tommy had better last days, or at least better last half of the last day than I did. I was definitely super proud and a little envious of them both for looking so strong physically and mentally. They are both fantastic runners. Lastly, I knew Kevin was out there somewhere a ways back, Mr. Boyd, and I was pretty certain he didn't have a crew, so I made a beeline for him deliberately. Learning from my Tommy encounter, I decided to stop at the Bastrop Buc-ee's where I had shed tears on the way and grab a few hot items, a big hot chocolate, a couple of hot sandwiches, some trail mix just in case. I caught up with Kevin about 3 miles from the entrance to Boucher and Bastrop State Park, and he looked cold. I'm not actually sure he recognized me at first, but I reintroduced myself, and he jumped in the car for a warm-up. We chatted about his race day for 20 minutes or so, and he appeared to be having a rough moment, so I think I got there in the nick of time. He got the hot chocolate down, he ate a hot sandwich, and I think he seemed much better after that. Since he still needed to go hit the parks, I offered to go ahead of him and meet him there an hour and a half later, which I did. As Kevin made his way to the parks, I made sure his day pass was taken care of, and I watched and waited for him. Eventually he arrived, and we chatted again. We shared a mile or so of park walking before I had to leave and go back to the car since I was heading to Houston. I was genuinely sad to leave Kevin. He is such a nice guy, and I know what lay ahead for him. But he assured me that his wife was coming by to assist on the long, lonely miles through the state park, and that he would be okay. You know, sometimes it's not physical support you need the most, but mental. I know from having run the majority of the first part of this race alone that it's so good sometimes just to have a friendly face around and someone to talk to. I was very glad to be able to provide that in those moments for Kevin and make sure he knew he had a little support. The guy is such a beast. Kevin got out the park several hours later that night, but he actually finished the race in his own neighborhood on Sunday in ice, snow, and 10-degree weather, with encouragement from our entire race participant group on the Messenger app. Rob, the race director, cancelled the original finish late Saturday and told everyone, get off the course. If you're still on it, get off the course and go finish at home, since conditions were getting worse and really very dangerous at this point. Knowing where he was when I left him, how long it took him, and the struggles he went through, the amount of perseverance and guts he showed to get it done in hostile conditions was unbelievable. I have a ton of respect for all the racers that were out there, but I think Kevin most of all. What an effort. I love the epic nature of these races. They seem above and beyond normal racing, and I love that they have almost nothing to do with how fast or slow you believe you are. So many stories, memories, such shared experiences and camaraderie. At the time, that was the second one of those I've done, the Ring of Fire and Anglesey in North Wales being the first, and I really like this style of running. Yeah, it can be painful physically going that far, but they do expose you to yourself, challenging you and helping you to cope mentally when things don't go right. And they never go right in long races like this. Something always goes wrong. I have a quiet glow of self-satisfaction and some killer memories and experiences that I could not have gotten any other way but doing this race. I trained for 6 months straight from injury to complete this race, and I accomplished my goal. Winning was an entirely unexpected and cool bonus, but never the intent. My goal was to finish at my own pace, on my own terms, and to help others finish if I could, and to have a story to tell, something epic. After all, isn't that what we're all after when everything's said and done? A sense of learning and satisfaction and some epic story to tell and inspire your kids as they grow up? You can do hard things. And honestly, it doesn't matter if you didn't complete the race. Either way, you gain experience and you learn something for next time. All you do need is the guts to sign up and toe the line. The rest will take care of itself. If you're willing to try and willing to accept the consequences, whether they're good or bad, cool things can happen. So after 6 months of obsessing, 300 kilometers, 186 miles, 5 counties, 4 days, 3 really angry Dobermans, 2 Buckies that made me cry, 1 finish, and a way too long report, I was finally done. I do hope to see you at the next one of these long races. Come find me and say hi. I promise you'll have some great stories to share no matter what happens. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, share, follow, and review. Doing any of these really does help with the algorithms, which in turn helps get the word out and helps others find the show. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook and over at choosetoendure.com. I'm also over on YouTube now for a video version, though. Why anyone would want to see that, I have no idea. Anyway, be sure to head over to any of those and check us out, or say hello, or drop a message, throw a topic out there, give us some feedback if you have a moment. I love getting those interactions. Until then, run long, run strong, and keep choosing to endure.
Thanks for running with us at the Choose to Endure podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. We had a blast. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. Keep racking up the miles and the stories, and we'll catch you at the next trailhead. Until then, remember to run long, run strong.